Hello, it is so good to see you. If you're new here, my name is Rebecca. I'm a writer. I'm currently working on my debut literary fiction novel, which I've titled Project Eden. It is what I have been crudely pitching as a 90s East Coast autumn ghost story. I am in the midst of revisions, well, really more towards like the beginning. I'm in this weird revision slash redrafting phase, but I finished the first draft up in January, and we are currently working on getting the story in tip-top shape before hopefully querying it at the end of the year. I thought we would switch things up today and talk a little bit more about the books that sort of helped me solidify that I want to be a writer, the books that really inspired Eden. I think as a writer, like the number one piece of advice that you get is to be a good writer, you have to be a good reader. And sometimes you can walk away from that feeling like, what does that mean? So I wanted to share with you guys the books that I think mean the most to me. These aren't necessarily like my favorite books of all time, but these books are definitely up there, and they're the books that inspired me to write and to pursue writing and to really make it a daily practice in my life. This is gonna be a very chill, laid back, sit down style video. So if you just kind of wanna have me in the background while you do some chores, make it podcast style, please feel free to do so. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. The first book that I want to talk about is one that, if you know me, will not be very surprising at all, and that is Twilight by Stephenie Meyer. This cult classic has been with me through so many different stages in my life. The book follows our main character Bella as she moves to Forks, Washington with her dad Charlie and falls in love with Edward, who is a vampire. Bada bing, bada boom. That's the quick and easy of it. I remember when this came out, I was going to a very Christian private school, and stuff like this was just like really not encouraged. And my parents did not want me reading stuff like this, but I remember my really good friend Courtney, and she very kindly, I remember, brought it to school and passed it around, and we would all read it in secret in between classes, in the bathroom. I recently reread this back in October, and I just remember like taking a hot shower, doing my everything shower, getting into like fresh, clean sheets, putting on like Bella's ambiance noises on my big TV in the bedroom and just reading for like an hour or two. It was like so peaceful, and the first book really is something like so special and so serious to me. But I think that as a writer, more than anything, this book taught me how to write something that's fun. I think there's a lot of conversation right now about the state of literature and books and publishing and the kind of stories that are getting published. And I know that a lot of people kind of rag on, to pick two examples, like Sarah J. Maas and Rebecca Yarros's Fourth Wing, ACOTAR, Throne of Glass. While I won't talk on the authors personally and the practice of, I think, appropriating Gallic culture for like a fantasy novel, there is something to be said about writing in a way that's accessible, writing in a way that brings readers in, writing in a way that's fun and enjoyable, and some part or another tends to resonate with people. So I think for me, this book taught me so much about what it means to just write something fun. One of the things that I will say probably repeatedly during this video is the fact that I don't reread a lot of books. In fact, there's probably only one other book on this list that I've reread like voraciously in adulthood. So when a story gets me to reread it and I find joy in it every single time, like that's really special to me. This also taught me so much about setting as character and how important the vibe is to the story, and how it's kind of a vehicle as well for immersion and making sure that your characters and your reader feel grounded in the story that you're trying to tell. I think one of the biggest pieces of feedback that I've gotten on Eden so far is the fact that my setting as character feels very strong, which is great because Eden itself is definitely supposed to be a character in the story. I feel like when I'm reading this book, especially when I recently reread it, I feel like it helped me so much to understand how to write something fun and how to also take note of the setting and how that can really drive the story forward and how it can make it feel really grounded in the world that you're trying to establish. I really, really cherish this book, and I'm so grateful that I have such a special place in my heart for it. The next book that I want to talk about is Lovecraft Country by Ruff. I came across this story first from the HBO show of the same name. I remember being absolutely obsessed with it. It was so weird, it was so out there, and the book is honestly on par. There are some bits that are different, of course, but I really enjoyed both the show and the book immensely. Set in Chicago in 1954, when his father goes missing, 22-year-old Army veteran Atticus Turner embarks on a road trip to New England to find him, accompanied by his Uncle George, publisher of the Safe Negro Travel Guide, and his childhood friend Letitia. On their journey to the manor of Samuel Braithwaite, heir to the estate that owned one of Atticus's ancestors, they encounter both mundane terrors of white America and malevolent spirits that seem straight out of the weird tales George devours. Atticus discovers his father in chains, held prisoner by a secret cabal, the Order of the Ancient Dawn, led by Braithwaite and his son Caleb, which is gathered to perform a ritual that shockingly centers on Atticus. And his one hope of salvation may be the seed of his and the whole Turner clan's destruction. A chimerical blend of magic, power, hope, and freedom that stretches across time, touching diverse members of two Black families, Lovecraft Country is a devastating kaleidoscopic portrait of racism, the terrifying specter that still haunts us today. I highly recommend that everybody, no matter what genre you read this book. It is insanely good. It's weird. It's wild, and there are moments that are incredibly chilling. I think this book and this story does such a great job of blending real world issues with sci-fi and horror. I'm a very slow reader, but I think I read this book in like a couple of days. I was literally turning the pages and like staying up late to read this, which was a mixed bag because I did have some weird dreams after I read this. Ruff's writing style in particular is very quick and immersive. It's factual yet fantastical. I think he takes the outlandish and roots it in a way that feels believable and immersive. And I think with me, science fiction, the toughest part is being able to picture what's happening. I think because science fiction to me is naturally quite strange and odd and kind of pushes the boundaries visually. It's usually really hard for me to visualize exactly what's going on and feel like I can follow along with what's happening. But I think Matt Ruff does such a great way of blending all of the weirdness and the horror in big and small ways in stuff that's rooted in our reality and stuff that is obviously like fictional. He does it so well. And I think this book taught me a lot about trusting myself to write really weird and outlandish stories. So while Eden isn't anywhere near this genre pool at all, I think it really gave me a lot to think about and a lot to marinate when it comes to my future projects. There's another author tuber in this space. Her name is Chris Fajardo. She is about to traditionally publish her book Local Heavens, which is a queer cyberpunk Gatsby retelling. And a lot of what she talks about when she talks about her process with that book was that it was her weird book, right? This was the book that she was doing for fun, and this was the one that she really didn't think about commercially or anything like that. She just wrote it because she wanted to. That's the book that she ended up queering. That's the book that she ended up getting a book deal on. And this book, combined with everything that I've heard of her and her experience when it comes to writing and this whole pool of publication, I think it just really solidified in me the desire to write the stories that I want to write, no matter how weird they might be. They gave me a lot of courage to pursue some really weird ideas after Eden. So aside from anything, if you just want a really good story and a really interesting critique of Chicago during this time and this Black family and whiteness and just everything, this is such a good book. There is a follow-up, I think. I'm not sure if there's a sequel, if it's like a direct sequel or if it's just in the same universe, but I'm definitely going to be picking it up as soon as I catch up on my TBR. The next book that I want to talk about is A Magical Girl Retires by Pak Solyon. She's a Korean author. I'm really hoping I pronounced that correctly. I actually picked this up while I was in the throes of my unemployment journey last year. This book came to me at a time where I think I really needed it. So let me tell you a little bit more about it. 29, depressed, and drowning in credit card debt after losing her job during the pandemic, a woman decides to end her troubles by jumping off Seoul's Mapo Bridge. But her attempt is interrupted by a girl dressed all in white. Ah Roa, the clairvoyant magical girl, is on a mission to find the greatest magical girl of all time. and our protagonist may just be that special someone. But the young woman's initial excitement turns to frustration when she learns being a magical girl in real life is much different than how it's portrayed in stories. It isn't just destiny, it's work. Magical girls go to job fairs, they join trade unions, and attend classes. And for this magical girl, there are no special powers and no great perks. And despite being magical, she still battles with low self-esteem. Her magic wand is a credit card, which she must use to defeat a terrifying threat that is neither monster nor intergalactic war. Pak Sol-yeon reimagines classic fantasy tropes in a novel that explores real-world challenges that are both deeply personal and universal. The search for meaning and the desire to do good in a world that feels like it's ending. A fun, fast-paced, and enchanting narrative that sparkles thanks to the award-nominated translator Anton Her. A Magical Girl Retires reminds us that we are all magical girls and that fighting evil by moonlight and winning love by daylight can be anyone's game. I'm not gonna lie, the cover of this really drew me in. It's absolutely gorgeous, and there's even illustrations on the inside, but like, hello? I went through a point there during my unemployment journey where everything just felt really hopeless, and it was getting really hard to see any movement, the light at the end of the tunnel. It's really, really tough. And this book, it's short. I read this like in a day. Something about it just really resonated with me. I think maybe it was where I was at emotionally, maybe it was where I was at mentally, but like, I really feel like I tried to search out books that were touching on some of the things that I was going through in that point in my life, and I actually really struggled. When I'm going through a tough time, really turn to art, to music, to movies, to literature that kind of resonate with where I'm at that point in time. And I think this book just really solidified for me how important it is to write about the things that matter to me and the things that I'm going through, because I feel like Eden very much is that. It's kind of a reflection on some of the things that I went through during unemployment, some of the lower moments that I've had in my life. Like, I definitely relate to Peter a lot in the way that he tends to disconnect from people, which I feel like might be shocking to a lot of people, considering how I choose to show up online and how vulnerable I am and how open I feel like I am about a lot of things. But to be completely honest, like, communicating is really hard for me, and being vulnerable when someone is right across from me is also really, really tough. Writing is a way that I'm able to do that. It's a way that I'm able to kind of explore these different pieces of myself, especially as I've grown up and changed. And I think, I don't know, this little book really did something to me where it was just like, it gave me a lot of courage to be vulnerable with writing and put a little bit more of myself out there in the stories that I write and try to like navigate my way through that and those feelings. I just remember feeling like so seen at the end of this book. I really, really wanted to be able to write something like that for somebody else. The next book that we're going to talk about is Practical Magic by Alice Hoffman. For more than 200 years, the Owens women have been blamed for everything that has gone wrong in their Massachusetts town. Jillian and Sally have endured that fate as well. As children, the sisters were forever outsiders, taunted, talked about, pointed at. Their elderly aunts almost seemed to encourage the whispers of witchery, with their musty house and their exotic concoctions and their crowd of black cats. But all Jillian and Sally wanted was to escape. One will do so by marrying, and the other by running away. But the bonds they share will bring them back, almost as if by magic. While a cult classic movie in this house year-round, the book does vary in a few different ways. And one of the things that I really, really enjoy is that while the general plot is the same for both, the book does a little bit more to explore Jillian's character as well as Antonia and Kylie's, which are Sally's daughters. This book focuses a lot on female relationships, female friendships, the bonds of sisterhood, the bonds of family. I think the power of women in groups. And I think the biggest thing that this story actually taught me how to write was a sense of coziness. Don't get me wrong, there's a dark edge to this book because, spoiler, if you don't know, they kill Jillian's husband. It's about them kind of navigating that and how are they gonna like get away with it. It's a really great juxtaposition to a lot of the other lightness that exists in both the book and the movie. So much of that inspired Eden. I really wanted this beautiful, cozy, picturesque paradise. And it's not so much that the town has a dark edge to it, it's the characters and the way that they kind of use certain pieces and aspects of this town, because Eden is really meant to be this blank canvas, and it's the characters that give it color. A lot of what this book taught me as well is that small stories can have really big impact. I think that they can have bigger things to say. They can touch, these smaller stories are much more like a character study and a lot about like the human condition. I think the magic in this book as well is so simple and not something that like needs to be explained. It just is. And I feel like that makes it feel almost more believable. You don't have all of this lore. It's just this thing that's existed and you just kind of accept it. This just has such a special place in my heart as well, because it just taught me so much about like setting and how characters can really drive a story forward, and writing something cozy. And cozy does not need to mean boring. It can mean a lot of different things. And so I get to define what it means to me. Needed a water break? Just in time to get to the really heavy portion of this video. I'm gonna try my best not to cry while I talk about this. And I say that because the next two books that I'm gonna talk about are two books that really pushed me to write. They both feel incredibly pertinent given today's political climate, especially here in America. So I'm also choosing to put these two books together because they taught me probably the biggest lesson out of all of the books that I have here today, and that is that I want to write to say something. It's something I think about every time I sit down in front of the computer. It's why I'm so hard on myself when it comes to writing and when it comes to making my story as strong as it can be, not just Eden, but anything at all that I work on. So the two books that I'm going to talk about right now are The Hunger Games. I actually recently just donated my original set. So I have The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes here by Suzanne Collins, and The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. Let's start with The Hunger Games. In the ruins of a place once known as North America lies the nation of Panem, a shining capital surrounded by 12 outlying districts. The capital keeps the districts in line by forcing them all to send one boy and one girl between the ages of 12 and 18 to participate in the annual Hunger Games, a fight to the death on live TV. 16-year-old Katniss Everdeen regards it as a death sentence when she steps forward to take her sister's place in the games. But Katniss has been close to death before, and survival, for her, is second nature. Still, if she is to win, she will have to start making choices that weigh survival against humanity and life against love. Like Twilight, this is another cult classic. It kicked off the dystopian genre and inspired so many other books in the genre that missed the point. And more importantly, this book is a critique of America. It's a critique of the machine that it's become. It's a critique of the way that it operates, the way that it hoards wealth, of the way that it uses media and propaganda to subjugate the very people it's supposed to help. It alienates the people that pick the food that goes on our table. It's also a critique of the way that this country screams to think of the children while continuously putting them in harm's way. And then we have The Handmaid's Tale. Set in the near future, it describes life in what was once the United States and is now called the Republic of Gilead. A monotheocracy that has created a social unrest and a sharply declining birth rate by reverting to and going beyond the repressive intolerance of the original Puritans. The regime takes the book of Genesis absolutely at its word, with bizarre consequences for the women and men in its population. The story is told through the eyes of Offred, one of the unfortunate handmaids under the new social order. In condensed but eloquent prose, by turns cool-eyed, tender, despairing, passionate, and wry, she reveals to us the dark corners behind the establishment's calm facade, as certain tendencies now in existence are carried to their logical conclusions. The Handmaid's Tale is funny, unexpected, horrifying, and altogether convincing. It is at once scathing satire, dire warning, and a tour de force. It is Margaret Atwood at her best. I first read The Handmaid's Tale in my Women in Literature class in my undergrad, and I remember thinking, this book is so bonkers. It's so bananas. It's so crazy. Like, this would never happen. No one would ever do this. This book calls us all out. While there are many overlapping themes between these two books, I think the thing that resonated with me both is that they have these strong female protagonists at their center that both do very different things, but more importantly, all they want is their freedom. Katniss did not ask to be the face of a rebellion. Obviously, Offred did not choose to be this sort of surrogate. I think it's also really important to note that these two women, the themes of reproduction and that choice, one is very blatantly in your face with The Handmaid's Tale, obviously, as that civilization kind of struggles with fertility. And these women that are blessed to be able to do this are subjugated and treated like dirt. And then you have Katniss, who grew up in this awful regime that threw its children to the wolves to send a message, that never wanted to reproduce. Neither of these women really had a choice. I don't often get political on my channel. I've never really found a need to, but since we're talking about these books and what they mean and the importance and weight that they hold, I feel that this is definitely a moment and an opportunity to talk about something that is very important to me and something that I think is incredibly pertinent to the way that the United States is currently heading. Women's rights, freedoms, and healthcare are at risk. A lot of freedoms and rights in this country are currently at risk. And sadly, I think the hard pill to swallow is that they will continue to be at risk for a very long time. Art is political. Writing, media, it's all political. I know that there's a discourse being held on Book Talk and YouTube and a lot of other spaces that we don't need to bring politics into this space. Like, it's not pertinent. It's not, you know, I read to escape. I read romance. So like, I don't understand how politics is a part of this conversation. And I want you all to understand that your ability to read and write is political, because women before you fought and advocated for the right to be able to do that. It is what we would consider a right, but it is something that did not come without a fight. While the world can seem a little bit doom and gloom right now, if these stories have taught us anything, specifically these two, it's that we the people have the power to change our circumstances. But don't forget that they want you to feel small. Don't forget that they are counting on you to give up. So if you are a woman or part of the LGBTQ community or a minority and you currently feel threatened in today's political climate, this is a safe space for you. And I want you to know things can change because we have the power to do so. And art and books play such a monumental role in being able to change the tides. And I feel like I know that's really heavy and you're probably thinking, Becca, how did we get on this topic? But here's the thing. That lit a fire under my ass like you would not believe, to write stories that matter, to write stories about the human condition, to write stories that help us all understand not only ourselves, but each other that much better. Because I feel like, because I have this ability and this desire to write and to be a storyteller, that I also have a social responsibility to talk about things that matter. I'm a little nervous putting this out there, but I just do think that it needs to be said, and it's so integral into how I create not just my writing, but my videos as well. Showing up online the way that I do is really important to me. And it's important that when you're showing up and you're making something, you're saying something, at least in my opinion. And that's how I choose to kind of move through this part of my life. And I'm really grateful for the stories that have kind of reinstilled that desire to do so, such as the Hunger Games and The Handmaid's Tale. Moving on, that feels really heavy. Everybody take a sip of their water, their tea, whatever you need to kind of come back down, because the next book that I'm going to be talking about is Blue Sisters by Coco Mellors. This is obviously a much more recent read. I actually picked this up after Christmas. This to me taught me so much about writing really strong characters. The three Blue Sisters are exceptional and exceptionally different. Avery, the oldest and a recovering heroin addict turned straight-laced lawyer, lives with her wife in London. Bonnie, a former boxer, works as a bouncer in Los Angeles following a devastating defeat. And Lucky, the youngest, models in Paris while trying to outrun her hard partying ways. They also had a fourth sister, Nikki, whose unexpected death left the family reeling. A year later, as they each navigate grief, addiction, and ambition, they find they must return to New York to stop the sale of the apartment they were raised in. But coming home is never as easy as it seems. As the sisters reckon with the disappointments of their childhood and the loss of the only person who held them together, they realize that the greatest secrets they've been keeping might not have been from one another, but from themselves. Imbued with Coco Mellors' signature combination of humor and heart, Blue Sisters is a story of what it takes to keep living after loss and, ultimately, to fall in love with life again. This book is such a masterclass on character and on voice. I think that Mellors' writing style is just incredible and borderline magical. I'm just gonna read to you the opening paragraph because when I read this, I knew immediately that I was going to have a really good time reading this book. A sister is not a friend. Who can explain the urge to take a relationship as primal and complex as a sibling and reduce it to something as replaceable, as banal as a friend? Yet this status is used again and again to connotate the highest intimacy. My mother is my best friend. My husband is my best friend. No. True sisterhood, the kind where you grew fingernails in the same womb, were pushed screaming through the same birth canals, is not the same as friendship. You don't choose each other, and there's no furtive period of getting to know each other. You're part of each other, right from the start. Look at an umbilical cord. Tough, sinuous, unlovely, yet essential. And compare it to a friendship bracelet of brightly woven thread. That is the difference between a sister and a friend. That umbilical cord friendship bracelet comparison knocked me on my ass. I sat there staring at the page and I'm like, wow, like, I don't know why, it just really like stuck with me. I think in addition to teaching me how to write characters and how to create a specific voice for myself when it comes to my writing, this story really solidified for me that something I really struggle with, the idea of Eden being way too small. And this book gave me the confidence to keep going forward. I think these smaller stories, these pockets of time, these characters that aren't trying to save the entire world, but they're trying to save their world and they're trying to figure out ways to move through it as better people. Even when, I mean, these sisters are really unlikable at the beginning. They're like flawed and borderline, like just really unlikable. But I found myself cheering for all of them as I was reading this, and Bonnie is my favorite sister. I'll say it every single time. But there's so much inspiration for Eden, and this book really pushed me when I was feeling so down about the story, and Coco is now a must-buy author for me, and I'm definitely going to be picking up Cleopatra and Frankenstein as soon as I catch up on my TBR. The next book that we're going to talk about is one that is of no surprise. If you know me, if we have talked in any capacity, I've probably recommended this book to you, and that is Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. I love this story. Everyone that knows me knows this book is my baby, both of the books. The franchise is everything to me. Nothing will top that first movie, and while I wish they would have leaned more towards a horror element, I 100% respect the action-adventure version of the story that they chose to tell. The reason that this story is like so important to me is because one of the first books that I ever remember getting when I was a kid, I was visiting my grandparents. Actually, I think I still live there. I was visiting my grandparents, and I remember getting a LeapPad Learning Frog system, and I only had one book, and it was a dinosaur book, and I think I used it so much that the speaker on like the leap pad thing actually wore out because I would spend hours learning about dinosaurs over and over and over again, and I was like desperate to learn more. And I think that, you know, when I was younger, I wanted to be a paleontologist, and I switched gears when I found out that they really don't make that much money, but it's still like a huge passion of mine, to the point where I actually do read like academic articles in scientific journals on the study of paleontology today and all of the advancements that they're making regarding understanding dinosaurs and fossils and their ecosystems and things like that. So like I have a lot of personal interest in like the subject matter of this book, but more than anything, when I first decided to read this book, I was both pleasantly surprised at how similar and also how different it is from the movie. This is definitely more of like a horror science fiction kind of story. Spielberg did make it more of an action adventure for the movie, but I think that this still obviously has a ton of adventure. And what this book specifically taught me a lot was about pacing. I think that it can be really tricky to identify the balance between giving your readers a sense of like breathlessness and waiting to see what happens next, and also giving them a respite and a moment to like reflect along with the characters on the things that are happening to them. And it gives the characters and the readers a moment to think about what just happened, right? This book taught me a lot about what it means to like engage with the reader when you're not there. I think one of the other things that Crichton does really well is set up the sort of pseudoscience involved in getting something like this started, which I didn't give the synopsis for this, but I'm pretty sure you all know. A wealthy businessman named John Hammond shows up and says, I want to bring back dinosaurs and I want to make a theme park. And this story is all about that theme park and how badly it goes, right? Chaos ensues. There's obviously a lot of science and a lot of like ethics that go into the idea of bringing back a dinosaur, bringing back any sort of extinct species. And what Crichton does is he sets up the science of this world in a way that, yes, is fictional, but it's so much of it is actually rooted in things that might be a possibility. So it makes me, as a person that's really not, I mean, at the time that I read this, I was not reading as many scientific journals as I was now regarding dinosaurs, and I never felt lost with this book, right? I never felt like, I think understanding the science helped ground the story a lot more, which I really appreciate. It wasn't necessarily essential, but like as a reader, I felt like I understood exactly what was going on. And so that was actually something that I really appreciated. Crichton does a really good job of mixing these like really horrifying moments with moments of respite. And I think I learned a lot about pacing and world building in a way that I haven't really learned from a lot of other books. So I'm really, really grateful to have this in my reading repertoire. It's something, I think I mentioned, this is one of the only other books that I reread pretty religiously. Pretty much every single summer for the last 4 years, I've reread both Jurassic Park and The Lost World. I have a special place in my life for this story and these characters and this book. The last book that I'm going to talk about is one that I don't think a lot of people will probably catch or think that I would probably like talk about. I mentioned this once during a stream as the book that really solidified that I wanted to be a writer, and that is Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie. This is my heart, my soul. I think pretty much everybody knows this story about the boy who never wanted to grow up. I think to understand the connection that I have to this book, we have to go back to my undergrad, because when I first started my undergraduate career, I was a business major. I didn't know what I wanted to pursue, and I thought, let me start with something that I know I can probably get a job in. It took one econ class for me to be like, this is not for me. During that time, I was also taking my introductory English courses. I adored my teacher, talked to her a little bit more, got to know the rest of the English department, fell in love with them to the point where That English department at my university is the reason why I'm so vocal about advocating for teachers and fair pay and making sure that we're respectful to our educators, because I am the person that I am today because of that English department. But I was on the cusp of deciding to switch from business to English and piss off my parents forever when I decided to reread this book. And there was something about that reread that really solidified for me that I wanted to tell stories. When I switched my degree to English, I justified it because I'm like, I can take that storytelling expertise and channel it to marketing, which I still kind of do today actually for like my 9-to-5 job. And I think I even have there's a journal entry where I talk about how I felt after rereading this. I think I was 19, and I don't know exactly what it was. I think it was for me the idea of, I was always kind of scared of growing up. There was just like these big adult milestones that I just really never had any interest in reaching, and I never really saw my life past like, I don't know, 25. This story taught me a lot about being able to stay young as I grow up. It's gotten harder as I've gotten older. The responsibilities start to pile up, and I feel like sometimes I lose a little bit of the kindness that I had so much of when I was younger, but it's been so important for me, and I think about it all the time, of being able to tell a story in the way that this story has resonated with me. It's so whimsical, it's so magical, it's a little weird there. There is like a fairy orgy in here, which I'm not gonna pretend like isn't weird, but this really is the story that started it all for me. I think it's the story that I love reading the most retellings of. Hook is one of my favorite movies of all time, and it inspired so much of Eden. You know, Eden is my Neverland. Peter is my version of Peter Pan, and it was so unintentional. It wasn't something that I really went into thinking about, but when I started putting the story together, it just kind of happened. I'm eternally grateful for that night, for that reread, because it set me off on a course of life that I don't think I would have had the courage to pursue had I not decided to change my major. I am where I am right now because of this story. I have been talking for a very long time, but I really do hope that you guys enjoyed this video. It's a little different. I think it's like a little bit more personal too, because I haven't really talked about how I got to this point with writing and why I'm pursuing it, I think, to the extent that I am. And I always think it's such an insight into like someone's like personal character when you get to hear a little bit more about the books that inspired them and resonated with them. I think it's also interesting to note that these aren't like my favorite books of all time. These are just the books that really inspired me as a writer. But I would love to know in the comments down below, what are the stories that resonated with you? If you're a writer, why do you choose to write? Like, what inspired you? If you're a creative, if you make videos, if you just feel called to make things, like, what was it that set you down that path? And what is it that you cling to when things get hard that motivates you to keep going? I would love to know, and I would love to be able to cheer you on. If you made it to the end of this video, leave a book emoji. I feel like that is probably the most appropriate. If you like this video, if you liked me, please consider giving it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't already. I post new videos pretty much every weekend. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!